Good evening and welcome to this our fourth episode of the Week Ahead series. We are independent research and we're publishing this on the 30th of June, Central African Time, 2024. And it's about 10 o'clock in the evening. So let's first discuss the week that was in South Africa. About in the last 24 hours, the Economic Freedom Front proposed to the African National Congress a new government that would exclude, in essence, the Democratic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus. These are these two parties, the Democratic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus, represent about 23% of the national vote. The national vote as at the 29th of, or rather the election was held on the 29th of May 2024. And in the last 24 hours, the EFF has scrapped or proposes the scrapping of the GNU, the Government of National Unity. EFF proposes the scrapping of that and suggests rather that a new government be formed to the exclusion of those two parties, the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. At the same time, cabinet announcements are still pending. These have been long anticipated by the South African people because they are in essence the outcome of negotiations that have happened since the 29th of May 2024, when the ANC, the African National Congress, lost its majority voters' support. So a coalition has been proposed in the early weeks since the elections, but that was scrapped by the ANC for a general government. And the cabinet announcements are still pending. Now, this is the national government right now, as it is composed of right now. It's about 10 parties. We have written on here the percentage each party enjoys of the national vote. The founding members of this government for national unity is the DA, the ANC. We had correctly predicted a coalition between these two things, but the ANC has opted an inclusion of these various other parties that hold, in essence, very small voter support. Their motivation for joining this GNU must be, just a willingness to, or rather an enthusiasm of forming part of the government. The Democratic Alliance, however, has bullied its way to gaining ministerial positions, and thus the negotiations have taken so long, because after the ANC, it is the one party that has the highest voter support in the GNU, and they have thus the power to really stall negotiations. So here we are. The ANC with a 40% national vote is the first and the biggest party in the GNU, followed by the Democratic Alliance with its 22%. Inkatha Freedom Party is predominantly a Zulu party. It enjoyed 4% of the national vote in the elections. Patriotic Alliance is a rather new party, holding about 2%. The Good Party is very, very small, very small party, but it has its founder is a member of the colored community. in South Africa. The Pan-African Congress of Azania is also a very small party. Vryheid Plus party is an offshoot of the National Party, which was the party that brought upon South Africa apartheid. So its offshoot still exists in this Vryheid Plus at 1% of the national vote, and they are miraculously part of the GNU. This conciliatory attitude of ANC to include people who are offshoots of movements that have worked to suppress what are basically the electorates of ANC, which is the black majority, is going to come back to the ANC to bite it. Will be the ANC's conciliatory attitude and sympathetic attitude with parties that have shown little regard to advance the lives of the ANC electorate, which is the black majority. This conciliatory attitude of the ANC is going to be its own undoing. The UDM, the United Democratic Movement, is also a very small party with Rise, a new party, and Al Jamaah, also a small party that has also joined the GNU. This is the picture in, this is the voting in picture form. Here we see the GNU basically being ANC, the DA on one hand, and everyone else on the other. The everyone else portion is about 7.6% of the national vote. They together are not able to, conjure up support for their own policies, but they will be important in advancing or supporting the policies that are conjured up by the ANC or the DA. Now, in the week after the election, it was said that the DA has veto power because, as part of the agreement that the ANC signed, one of the clauses therein was that 60% of parties per the national vote would have to agree on any policy advanced by the GNU before it is brought before the National Assembly for voting. 60% in this GNU requires the DA and the ANC to agree on any policies. Any disagreement there will lead to an impasse where concessions are going to have to be made either by the DA or the ANC. There was confusion in the early weeks after the election whether the 60% related to 60% of the GNU or 60% of the national vote. But having read the GNU agreement, it is certainly true that 60% of parties of a national vote have to agree. So that unfortunately gives the DA veto power, although the ANC may not have realized this when they signed the GNU document, but it in fact does that. Now, the inclusion of the EFF in the GNU would certainly change that scale or tip the scale of power. Here is a visual representation. The EFF with all the other parties with the ANC could, tip the scale of power, but whether the EFF is going to be included in the GNU, given its demand that the DA and the Freedom Front Plus be excluded from the GNU as a condition of them joining, it does not seem likely that the EFF will ever be in the GNU, simply because it's the 11th hour and cabinet positions should have been announced by the president about an hour ago, and that has not happened yet. So it seems like the GNU is that which excludes the EFF. Now let's talk about cabinet positions. Here, it's anybody's guess how that's going to go. Our own house view is that the outcome of this negotiations, as far as political or rather ministerial positions are shared between the parties in the GNU, it will demonstrate who in fact is in power in South Africa. And our own house view is that the ANC is going to be suffocated by the DA in the next 5 years. And we expect the ANC's voter support, to fall to at least 10% by 2029, because the ANC's willingness to include in the GNU the DA is a betrayal, we think, of the black electorate that has put ANC in power, especially when this black electorate understands the DA too, because it is a white party. It understands the DA to advance the interests of only white people. Whether or not that is true is irrelevant. This is the perception, and that perception is enough to have the black electorate become disillusioned with the ANC, such that they completely do not support the ANC, and we expect that their support will fall to 10% or less in 2029. In the interim, though, the next 5 years, racial tensions will increase in South Africa, because this is what South Africa is. It's a country in which race determines so much about your life, your quality of life, your aspirations, and how far you're able to go. We think that in the next 5 years, the one party that will be vibrant in the opposition will be EFF, as it shows or should show the alternative to government in South Africa. And we think that they will take full advantage of exposing the weak links in the GNU, exposing the ideological differences in the GNU, and how that plays out in the lives of ordinary South Africans, particularly Black South Africans. We do not believe that the MK will be an effective opposition, because we have not, other than the complaining of Jacob Zuma, heard anything by way of policy that will be particularly useful. So we do not think that the MK will be an effective opposition. That leaves the EFF being the only one to provide an alternative, which we think will be well received by the black majority electorate. In the interim, in the next 5 years, the trickle-down economics versus state intervention will be tested. By trickle-down economics, we mean the idea that should the markets prevail and markets be allowed to operate on their own, wealth thus created will be felt not only by the people at the top, but also the people at the bottom. This is the this is the position of the DA. One can read this to be the position of the DA, but we know in South Africa that the world created by apartheid was not a world in which free markets reigned. Rather, it was a world of state intervention on the behalf of exclusively white people for the benefit of white people. So it was state intervention that was by white people for the benefit of only white people. And that is the economy that South Africa has only ever known. It has never known a market economy except in the ghetto, where there is no, at least before 1994, there was no social net on, that would support the poorest of the poor, which are almost always black, the black majority. So this trickle-down economics has never worked in South Africa, but we suspect that there's going to be the gospel sang by the DA in the next 5 years, and we think that it's going to run in direct conflict with the ANC state intervention policies. Unfortunately, the state intervention policies is interpreted by the ANC has created not an improvement in the economic well-being of many black people, but has rather created a political elite or a billionaire class that has not in any way, shape, or form been for the benefit of the totality of black people. So we are going to see played out in the next 5 years a conflict, a true conflict, not just between black and white, but between which policies should be in place in South Africa that has so suffered from racism and from the tyranny of apartheid, colonialism, and everything else. Around the world, we see next week a UK election on the 4th of July. We expect Kenya to, in the next week, talk about how they're going to start austerity measures given the protests in that country. You will know that Kenya made the mistake, or the Kenyan National Assembly made the mistake to propose a finance bill that would have seen a hiking of taxes of all basic things, basic goods. The young people of Kenya refused to accept this, and the president was forced to reject the bill and not sign it into law. So as he does that, he now has to become very creative in how he plans then to reduce the debt burden of Kenya. Austerity is going to be the first thing he will do, and how he does that, I think, might teach South Africa, or if South Africans are willing to learn, how governments can run with a far less bloated budget. Kenya has been forced to find those avenues. The United States is going to eke on to a November 24 election. Biden's to a small performance at the debate last week shows that those elections are going to be anything but ordinary. Now, as South Africans, you want to understand how the politics of the rest of the world are unfolding so that you can learn from them and also know who is going to be pulling the political strings in the next 5 years. South Africa's own GNU government will begin its work in the next week. We will see. We are independent research where we think for ourselves. Our website will be in the description box below. Until next week, it's ciao for now.